Hello everyone, and welcome to our teacher training channel. Today we're going to focus on classroom methodology, and hopefully by the end of this video you'll be better able to explore different ways of setting up and managing classroom activities. In order to do that, we're going to be looking at 4 different points: interaction patterns, teacher language, giving instructions, and manage the learning group. Well, first and foremost, I'd like you to look at these statements and see if you agree or disagree with them. Well, regarding the first statement, it's important to keep in mind that gestures are used to support communication, and in the classroom, it's not different. And usually teachers need to use a lot of gestures, and developing this repertoire of easily understood gestures, for instance when you point over your shoulder to indicate the past, can be quite helpful, as it's very likely to cut down the amount of verbal explanation teachers are required to give. And as a result, the processing burden placed on learners, particularly at lower levels, might disappear, right? Considering the second point, for example, there is no doubt that it's always a good idea to learn your students' names. All right. As for the third one, whenever students are working pairs or in groups, for instance, there is usually a little bit of noise there. However, it's important to distinguish the difference between useful noise and disruptive noise. So the teacher has to be the teacher has to pay a lot of attention to it and see whether this noise is kind of useful or disruptive. As for the fourth statement, I would say that it's more useful for young learners, like maybe for teenagers, if they are if they don't wait till the others are finished. As for demonstrations in the last statement, it's important to remember that explanation is likely to challenge learners' ability to understand. And some classroom activities might also be very unfamiliar to them, so they are best demonstrated. So demonstrating activities is a very good idea, especially if your students are not familiar with the activities and if they have never done it before. So demonstrating might be very important to help them understand what they have to do. So now let's take a look at interaction patterns. And as you can see, you have a set of interaction patterns, like different interaction patterns, like a plenary, learners working alone, and learners working in pairs together, and learners working in groups, and learners mingle. I'd like you to think of an activity that is suitable for each type of interaction. So, for instance, if you take a look at the first one, maybe the second one, learner working alone, it might be a kind of interaction pattern that could be used when students are doing extensive reading, for instance. What about the others? Well, the first one, which is a plenary, could be used when teachers are giving feedback on an activity to the whole class, for instance. The second one, as I have mentioned previously, could be used when students are doing extensive reading, for instance. And learners working in pairs could be used in role-play activities, for instance, right? And as for number 4, learners working in groups, for instance, that could be a simulation of a courtroom trial, for instance. And learners mingle could be used when students have to do activities such as find someone who, right? Well, I truly believe that you might use one of these interaction patterns in your class. So in your classes. So how often do you use them, and for what reason? Why do you use them exactly? So let's take a look now at some teacher language. As you can see, this teacher language examples are very problematic, and especially for pre-intermediate students. So I'd like you to read them very quickly and try to identify the kind of problem it might have. Well, as you can see, these examples are very, very problematic. Like the first one is too hypothetical, right? In order for this teacher to make it clearer, he could have said simply, "You are a policeman." That would be fine, right? As for the second one, it contains a lot of difficult colloquial language, right? Like have a bit of a chat and jot down some ideas. For pre-intermediate students, there will be more like B1 students according to the CEFR. So I think it would be too complicated for them. So maybe a way to make it easier and clearer could be just by saying, write down your ideas, then talk to your partner. That will be much easier and simpler for these students. And number 3 is too polite, right? Could you possibly talk to the person sitting on your right? A little bit unnatural, right? So maybe if the teacher said, talk to the person sitting on your right, would be clearer and simpler and more natural. Number 4, obviously, there's too much information all at once, so this instruction should have been broken down. So maybe it could have been divided into 2 different parts or two different stages to make it easier for the students to understand. Number 5 uses a lot of complex grammar structures, like having made your notes. You would then be able to check your ideas together. I think it's like too complex for pre-intermediate students. So maybe the teacher could have said, first make notes, then check your ideas together. It would make their lives much easier. This kind of structure could have been used maybe with higher level students, probably. And the 6th one is too simple and unnatural, right? All learners talking to partners, make conversation. So nobody talks like that. It's very, very unnatural and oversimplified. Maybe the teacher could have said, everyone talk to your partner and have a conversation. It would sound much more natural. Number 7 is overly descriptive, like now match these beautifully illustrated pictures to the randomly chopped up paragraphs from this fascinating text. Too descriptive, and also I think very, very unnatural, right? He could have simply said, match the pictures to the paragraphs in the text. It would be much simpler. As for number 8 is, I think there is too much complex jargon there, and the teacher could have simply said, now look for language examples like this in the sentences, right? It would make his students' lives much easier. Okay, very nice. All right, so now let's take a look at giving instructions. So first of all, I'd like you to look at these instructions, please, and could you please try to put them in order? Well, I hope you have something similar to this. Well, as you can see, it is important not only to give students instructions, but it's important to also check instructions. If you take a look at the steps, for instance, from step 1 through step 7, the teacher is giving instructions. And from step 8 through step 10, the teacher is checking instructions. Now, it is also very important to hand out the worksheet. To wait a little bit more to hand out the worksheet so that students' attention remain on you. If you hand out the worksheets before the instructions, the students are very likely to look at their handouts, and instead of paying attention to you. So it is also important to project your voice so that students can hear what you're saying. And as for the position you're going to stand in the classroom, it's important to stand in a central position so that you can keep eye contact with all your students, if they can see, and so that they can see what you're doing there. So let's take a look at these statements, these questions. And are you the kind of teacher who Well, as for the first question, it's important to remember that using gestures can add visual support to instructional sequences. So when you're giving instructions, it might be really useful. And as for number 2, it is vital actually to be able to maintain eye contact with the students. But remember that in some situations it may be culturally inappropriate and threatening, depending on the student's nationality. Well, as for the body position, it will really depend on the classroom layout and cultural norms. For instance, in some countries it's considered not appropriate for the teacher to sit down, believe it or not. So as for number 4, always monitors learners during pair work. It is a good idea, but it might be very difficult with large groups. What we can do is, the thing is, close monitoring too soon in a speaking task may prevent your students from talking. Like you might inhibit students and stop them from talking. As for number 5, doesn't have to project their voice. I would say that some teachers are able to get learners' attention just by looking at them or raising their hand. But voice projection is less important with very small groups, right? If you're teaching like 4 or 6 students, it's not even necessary. And some teachers establish they kind of set some routines, and students know that whenever the teacher raises their hands, it's because they want to talk, it's because they need their attention. So yeah, it really depends on the teacher. Number 6, ask questions, then nominates a student. Well, it's usually preferable to nominate a learner after asking a question. By doing that, students are much more likely to be involved in the lesson. Okay. And if you like moving the classroom furniture during a lesson, well, again, it will depend on the nature of the furniture in the classroom, but also the size of the room and the size of the learner group. Sometimes it's quite easy, sometimes it's quite difficult to move them around. And as for number 8, which is the last one, always stays at the front of a classroom. Again, classroom layout may make it difficult for teachers to move away from the front of the room, right? It's usually preferable for the teacher to be in a central position so that learners can see what you're doing. Okay? Well, guys, I hope it helps, and well, if you like it, please click on I like it or something like that. All right? Thank you very much. Bye-bye.